I'm 52 years old, and I've kept the Crowley Point Lighthouse for 18 years. On March 3, 2019, a storm hit with winds measuring 87 knots, and when I found her tangled in the rocks the next morning, I made a choice that I've been paying for every night since. The National Weather Service had issued warnings 3 days before the storm arrived. I'd prepared the lighthouse according to standard protocol, secured all exterior equipment, reinforced the storm shutters, moved emergency supplies to the upper levels in case of flooding. I'd weathered 47 significant storms during my tenure at Crowley Point. This one registered as severe, but not unprecedented. The wind began at 6:34 p.m. on March 3rd. I recorded the timing in my logbook, a habit I'd maintained since my first week as keeper. By 9 p.m., sustained winds had reached 71 knots with gusts exceeding 85. The lighthouse beacon was functioning normally, rotating every 15 seconds, visible for approximately 19 nautical miles under clear conditions. In storm conditions, visibility reduced to maybe 8 miles, but the light continued its rotation without interruption. At 11:47 p.m., the main electrical system failed. Not unusual during severe weather, I'd installed backup generators specifically for this scenario. The backup engaged automatically, maintaining the beacon without any gap in service. I noted the system failure in the log and prepared to assess damage once the storm passed. The wind peaked at 2:33 a.m. on March 4th. I measured 87 knots sustained with a gust that hit 94 knots at 2:41 a.m. That gust tore 3 panels off the eastern storm shutters. Rain came through the exposed window in sheets, flooding the ground floor storage area with approximately 6 inches of water before I could deploy the emergency barriers. The storm broke at 4:18 a.m. Wind dropped below 40 knots within 20 minutes, then continued declining steadily. By 6 a.m., conditions had improved enough that I could conduct an exterior damage assessment. I waited until 6:47 a.m. when winds measured below 25 knots, my personal safety threshold for outside work. The eastern side of the lighthouse complex had sustained the most damage. 3 shutters destroyed, 1 section of railing torn completely away, various equipment housings cracked or displaced. I began documentation with my camera, standard procedure for insurance claims and Coast Guard reports. I photographed the shutter damage first, then moved down the eastern path toward the rocks where the railing had detached. I found her at 7:23 a.m., wedged between 2 large rocks approximately 40 feet below the lighthouse platform. My first thought was that I was looking at a large seal or sea lion caught in the receding storm surge. I descended the maintenance ladder to get a closer view, still believing I was approaching a known marine mammal. She was approximately 6 feet in length from head to what I initially categorized as a tail structure. Her skin was gray, darker along the dorsal surface, lighter on the ventral side. No fur, no blubber layer visible. The texture appeared smooth, almost human-like. She wasn't moving, but I could see slight gill movement on her neck. She was breathing, or attempting to. I got within 10 feet before I understood what I was actually seeing. Her upper body was distinctly humanoid. Arms with defined shoulders, elbows, wrists, hands with 5 digits. The webbing connected them nearly to the first knuckle. Her torso showed clear ribcage definition, suggesting mammalian physiology rather than fish anatomy. Her face stopped me completely. The bone structure was human. Defined cheekbones, a forehead with normal curvature, a nose that was flatter than typical human proportions but recognizably a nose. Her mouth was slightly wider, but she had distinct lips. Her eyes were closed, but the eye sockets followed human dimensions. If I'd seen just her face in different context, I would have identified her as human without question. The lower body transitioned at approximately the hip region. What I'd initially thought was a tail was actually fused legs, covered in the same gray skin, ending in a structure more like elongated feet than a traditional fishtail. She could probably separate the legs with effort, but they were held together by webbing that ran the entire length. She had 3 deep lacerations, one across her left shoulder, approximately 8 inches long, another along her right side, maybe 10 inches. The third wrapped partially around her neck, the most concerning of the injuries. All 3 were bleeding, though the blood was darker than human blood, more brown than red. I made a decision in approximately 15 seconds. I didn't know what she was, Didn't know if helping her was wise or even safe. But she was injured. She was breathing, and I was the only person within 20 miles who could do anything about it. I retrieved the marine mammal emergency kit from the lighthouse, standard equipment for coastal keepers, and returned to the rocks. She didn't wake during initial treatment. I cleaned the wounds with saline solution, applied antibiotic ointment designed for marine mammals, and closed the lacerations with surgical staples. 18 staples total across the 3 wounds. Her skin was thicker than human skin, required more pressure to penetrate. The tissue felt like dense rubber, not flesh. I couldn't move her alone. She weighed at least 140 pounds, possibly more. The rocks were slippery, the angle steep. I made the decision to leave her where she was until I could determine if she would wake, if she could move on her own, if moving her was even necessary. I checked her every 2 hours throughout that day. At 1:34 p.m., I noticed her gills moving more regularly. At 3:52 p.m., her fingers contracted slightly. At 7:18 p.m., she opened her eyes. They were completely black. No visible iris, no white sclera, just reflecting black surfaces that tracked my movement with obvious intelligence. She looked at me for approximately 30 seconds without any other movement. Then she looked at her shoulder, at the staples I'd placed there, then back at me. The expression on her face was something I recognized immediately. Assessment. She was evaluating whether I was a threat. I raised both hands, palms open, the universal gesture for non-aggression. She watched my hands, then looked back at my face. She opened her mouth slightly. I saw teeth that were too sharp, too numerous, then closed it again without making any sound. She was trying to decide if she could communicate, if I would understand. I spent 18 years at Crowley Point practicing caution and procedure. I'd never deviated from Coast Guard protocols, never taken unnecessary risks, never made decisions without considering long-term consequences. But when she extended her hand toward me, palm up, waiting to see if I would make contact, I reached out and placed my palm against hers without hesitation. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. Not telepathy exactly, but something close. I didn't hear words. I experienced understanding directly, meaning transmitted without language. She was showing me gratitude, acknowledgement that I'd helped her, recognition that I could have chosen differently. Then she showed me something else, a question, formed not in words but in concepts I somehow understood. She was asking if I needed help in return, if there was something she could offer me as exchange for what I'd done. I should have refused. I should have helped her back to the water, wished her well, returned to my duties. But in that moment of contact, she'd somehow seen into my thoughts the same way I'd seen into hers. She knew about the lighthouse beacon, about the equipment failure that had left it dark for 6 months, about my failed attempts to secure funding for repairs. She knew I'd been operating on emergency power, that the main light was non-functional, that ships were being redirected to longer routes because Crowley Point was listed as non-operational. She asked her question again, more specifically this time. The meaning came through clearly. She could fix what was broken. She could restore the lighthouse to full function. But there would be a price, payment collected over time in a way I wouldn't fully understand until the exchange had already begun. I was 52 years old. I'd spent 18 years maintaining that lighthouse, watching ships pass safely because of the beacon I kept operational. 6 months of darkness felt like a personal failure, like I'd abandoned the one responsibility that actually mattered. When she offered to fix it, when she showed me through that strange connection that she could restore full functionality, I accepted without asking what the price would be. I pulled my hand away from hers. She looked at me for another few seconds, then pushed herself toward the water's edge. Her movement was awkward on the rocks, more like a seal's locomotion than anything else. She reached the water at 7:34 p.m. and slipped beneath the surface without looking back. I watched the spot where she disappeared for approximately 10 minutes, but she didn't resurface. I climbed back to the lighthouse and made no record of the encounter in my official log. I told myself I would add it later, once I understood what had actually happened. That was 5 years ago. I never made that entry. I didn't see her again for 4 days. During that time, I completed storm damage repairs, filed required reports with the Coast Guard, and maintained standard operating procedures. I documented the shutter damage, the destroyed railing, the flooded storage area. I submitted repair cost estimates totaling $8,400. I noted in my official log that the main beacon remained non-operational, running on emergency backup power only. I thought about her constantly, not in an obsessive way, but as a problem requiring classification. I'd spent 18 years cataloging marine life around Crowley Point. Seals, sea lions, dolphins, occasional whales. I knew what belonged in these waters. She didn't match anything in my reference materials. On March 5th, I searched online databases for similar encounters. I used careful search terms: unusual marine mammal, humanoid sea creature, mermaid sightings. Most results were obviously fictional, folklore, or misidentifications of known species. 3 results seemed potentially legitimate. Encounter reports from other lighthouse keepers, filed decades ago, quickly dismissed by authorities. One report from 1947, Cape Hatteras, described a woman-shaped creature recovered after a hurricane. The keeper who filed the report noted intelligent eyes, human-like hands, wounds treated with standard first aid. The creature disappeared 3 days later. The keeper was removed from duty 2 weeks after that, officially cited for psychological stress. Another from 1973, Point Reyes, California. Similar description: humanoid upper body, fused lower limbs, responsive to human presence. That keeper had been more careful, filed the report as unknown marine mammal, avoided using language that suggested anything supernatural. The report was archived without investigation. The third from 1989, Maine coast. That keeper had made the same mistake I'd made. They'd helped an injured creature without considering the implications. The report described recovery of an unusual specimen, but provided minimal detail. That keeper resigned 4 months after the incident, citing personal reasons. I noticed a pattern in the dates: 1947, 1973, 1989. Roughly 26-year intervals, each occurring after major coastal storms. I checked historical weather data. Hurricane season 1947, severe Pacific storm 1973, nor'easter 1989. Major weather events that would have created dangerous conditions for any creature living in relatively shallow coastal waters. March 2019 placed us 26 years after the last documented encounter. I didn't believe in supernatural patterns, but I couldn't ignore the mathematical consistency. She returned on March 8th at 6:47 a.m. I was conducting routine exterior inspection when I saw her in the water below the lighthouse platform, approximately 30 feet from shore. She was vertical in the water, head and shoulders above the surface, watching the lighthouse. When she noticed me watching back, she raised one hand in what I recognized as a greeting gesture. I descended to the rocks where I'd first found her. She swam closer but didn't come ashore, maintaining a distance of maybe 10 feet. I could see the staples still in place across her shoulder and side. The wounds appeared to be healing normally, no signs of infection. We looked at each other for approximately 2 minutes without any attempt at communication. I was waiting for her to initiate contact. She seemed to be waiting for me to demonstrate readiness. Finally, I knelt at the water's edge and extended my hand, palm up, the same gesture she'd used 4 days earlier. She swam forward immediately, placing her palm against mine. The connection opened faster this time, less disorienting. She was showing me the lighthouse, but from a perspective I'd never seen, from the water, looking up at the structure. She'd been watching it for longer than just today. She showed me multiple visits, different times of day, different weather conditions. She'd been monitoring the lighthouse for weeks before the storm. Then she showed me deeper water, regions far below where light penetrated, darkness broken only by bioluminescent creatures, pressure that would crush human bodies instantly. She was showing me where she lived, the territory she traveled. The lighthouse sat at the edge of her range, a marker she'd used for navigation for longer than I'd been alive. The connection shifted to something more specific. She showed me the beacon, the light rotating through the darkness, the pattern she'd memorized. She showed me ships altering course based on that light, avoiding rocks that would tear hulls open. She'd witnessed collisions before the lighthouse was built, had seen the pattern of death that the beacon prevented. I understood why she was showing me this. The lighthouse wasn't just my responsibility. It was something she valued too, something that served her interests. Ships that avoided the rocks meant fewer human bodies sinking into her territory. The beacon was a shared benefit. She released the connection and withdrew her hand. She dove beneath the surface and I thought she'd left, but she resurfaced 30 feet offshore and gestured for me to wait. Then she dove again, deeper this time, disappearing for long enough that I started to worry she wasn't coming back. She broke the surface at 7:34 a.m. carrying something. She swam to the rocks and placed the object on a flat stone near my feet. It was a piece of equipment, heavily corroded, covered in barnacles. I recognized it as a generator component, specifically a voltage regulator from the type of system installed in the lighthouse in 1987. I picked it up, examining it carefully. The corrosion was extensive, but the component was intact. More importantly, this was the exact part that had failed 6 months ago, the failure that had cascaded through the system and killed the main beacon. I'd reported it to the Coast Guard, requested replacement, been told funding wasn't available. This was a $10,800 component that I had no way of acquiring on my lighthouse keeper's salary. She watched me examine it, then placed her hand on the rock surface near my knee. I understood the gesture. She was offering contact again. I placed my palm against hers, and the connection showed me what she was proposing. The component in my hand was beyond repair, useful only as reference. But she was showing me that she knew where others like it existed. Systems from sunken ships, equipment lost during storms, machinery that had fallen to the ocean floor over decades. She could retrieve what I needed. She could find functional replacements for every failed system in the lighthouse. But there was still the matter of price. She showed me that the exchange wasn't simple barter. What she would give me had measurable value. Functioning lighthouse, ships guided safely, lives saved. What she would take from me couldn't be measured the same way. The payment would come gradually, extracted over time in ways I wouldn't recognize as payment at first. She showed me one clear image. My hand, my left hand specifically, placed against hers. She would take from that side, from the left half of my body, beginning with sensation and progressing to something deeper. The process would be slow, months or possibly years. I would remain functional throughout. The loss would be gradual enough that I could adapt to each stage before the next began. I pulled my hand away and sat back on the rocks. She remained in the water, watching me, waiting for a decision. The logical choice was obvious. Refuse the offer. Report the encounter to proper authorities. Continue operating on backup systems until official repairs could be funded. I'd managed 6 months already. I could manage longer if necessary. But I thought about the 3 ships that had been redirected last month because Crowley Point was listed as non-operational. I thought about the additional fuel those ships had consumed, the extra time added to their routes, the increased risk from navigating through less familiar waters. I thought about what would happen during the next major storm if the lighthouse remained dark. I placed my hand against hers again. Through the connection, I showed her acceptance. I agreed to the exchange. She would restore the lighthouse to full function, and she would take payment from the left side of my body over whatever timeline the process required. I understood it wouldn't be reversible once started. I agreed anyway. She released the connection and pushed away from the rocks. Before diving, she made a gesture with her right hand, pointing toward the lighthouse, then toward herself, then back to the lighthouse. She was indicating that the work would begin soon, that I should expect changes. She disappeared beneath the surface at 8:02 a.m. I climbed back to the lighthouse carrying the corroded component, already questioning whether I'd made the right choice. I placed it on my workbench and stared at it for approximately 20 minutes, trying to understand what I'd actually agreed to. That night, I dreamed about deep water. Not normal dreams, but something more vivid, more tangible. I experienced pressure, cold, darkness, absolute except for occasional bioluminescent flashes. I moved through that environment with perfect ease, as if I belonged there. When I woke at 6 a.m. on March 9th, my left hand was numb from the fingertips to the first knuckle. The numbness in my left hand persisted through March 9th and 10th. Not complete loss of sensation. I could still detect pressure, temperature, pain, but tactile sensitivity was significantly reduced. I tested it repeatedly, touching different textures, comparing response between left and right hands, documenting the exact boundary where normal sensation ended and numbness began. The line was precise. Full sensation ended at the first knuckle of each finger on my left hand. Beyond that point, everything felt distant, muffled, as if I were touching objects through thick rubber. I could still use the hand normally for gross motor tasks, but fine manipulation was compromised. I dropped things more frequently, struggled with buttons and small tools. I didn't see her on March 9th or 10th. I watched the water during routine patrols, looked for any indication of her presence. Nothing. The ocean remained empty except for normal marine traffic, seals on the southern rocks, a pod of dolphins passing at distance, various seabirds. On March 11th, I woke at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of something moving on the lighthouse exterior. Not wind, not weather. Deliberate movement, metal against metal, the sound of someone working with tools. I dressed quickly and went outside to investigate. She was climbing on the eastern face of the lighthouse, approximately 60 feet above the ground, working on the primary beacon housing. In the darkness, I could barely see her, just her gray form moving against the white structure. She was using tools. I could hear ratcheting, the distinctive sound of bolts being loosened and retightened. I called up to her. "What are you doing?" My voice sounded loud in the pre-dawn quiet. She stopped working, but didn't descend. Instead, she made a gesture I'd seen before, pointing to the beacon housing, then to herself, then to me. She was indicating that this was part of our agreement, that she was performing the work she'd promised. I wanted to tell her to stop, that she couldn't possibly repair complex electrical systems with whatever tools she'd brought from the ocean. But I didn't. I went back inside and waited. The sounds continued for another hour and 43 minutes. At 4:30 a.m. I heard her descending. I went outside to find her already at the water's edge. She placed something on the rocks, a canvas bag, heavily waterproofed, containing tools. I recognized some of them: wrenches, screwdrivers, wire strippers. Others were unfamiliar, possibly custom-made for underwater use. She gestured toward the bag, then toward the lighthouse, indicating I should check her work. I climbed to the beacon level as soon as there was enough light to see properly. The access panel was open, exposing the main electrical system. She'd done significant work, replaced corroded wiring, installed what looked like new circuit boards, cleaned connections that I'd documented as failed. The components appeared old, probably salvaged, but they were functional. At 9:47 p.m. on March 12th, exactly as she'd somehow indicated to me through our previous connection, the primary beacon activated. No warning, no gradual power-up. The light simply came on at full strength, rotating at the correct 15-second interval, projecting at full range for the first time in 6 months. I monitored it continuously for the next 4 hours. No fluctuations, no power drops, completely stable operation. Whatever she'd installed was working perfectly. I filed the required notification with the Coast Guard. Primary beacon restored to operational status. Crowley Point Lighthouse returned to active service. The next morning, I found detailed instructions written on the rocks below the lighthouse, rendered in something that looked like chalk but didn't wash away when I touched it. The symbols weren't any language I recognized, but when I placed my hand near them, I understood their meaning. She was telling me how to maintain the system she'd installed, which components needed regular checking, what signs indicated potential problems. She returned on March 15th, this time during daylight, 2:34 p.m. I was conducting exterior maintenance when she appeared in the water. She swam close to shore and placed her palm on a rock, waiting for me to join the connection. I knelt and pressed my hand against hers. The connection opened immediately. She was showing me deeper aspects of the agreement, clarifying terms I hadn't fully understood during our initial exchange. The numbness in my hand was the first stage of payment. It would progress gradually up my arm, then spread to other portions of the left side of my body. But the transfer wasn't taking sensation permanently. She showed me what was actually happening. The nerves weren't being damaged, they were being repurposed. The loss of feeling was because those neural pathways were being redirected, prepared to process different types of information. Eventually, I would be able to sense things through the affected areas that normal humans couldn't perceive. She showed me what that meant practically. Temperature changes in water at distance, pressure variations indicating weather patterns, electromagnetic fields generated by marine life. The affected portions of my body would become sensing organs for an environment I didn't naturally belong to. The timeline wasn't fixed. The rate of transfer depended on factors she couldn't completely predict: my body's adaptation response, how frequently we maintained contact, how much time I spent near the ocean. Minimum duration, 18 months, maximum, possibly 5 years. Once complete, the changes would be permanent. I asked through the connection what would happen when the transfer was complete, what I would become when the entire left side of my body had been repurposed. She showed me water, depth, the environment where she lived. She was showing me that I would be able to survive there, at least partially. I wouldn't be fully like her. I lacked too many necessary adaptations, but I would be capable of existing in that space longer than any normal human could. I pulled back from the connection, my head buzzing with information. "Why?" I said aloud, though I knew she couldn't understand spoken English. "Why would you want me to be able to do that?" She placed her hand on the rock again, waiting. I rejoined the connection, and she answered. Her people lived in isolation, maintaining distance from humanity because contact had proven dangerous historically. But the ocean was changing, warming, acidifying, becoming more hostile to the deep-water ecosystems her people depended on. They needed someone who could move between both environments, someone who understood human systems, but could also survive in deep water. She was creating a bridge, not just in me, but in others like me, lighthouse keepers and researchers who lived at the boundaries between land and sea. The process took years, required willing participants, couldn't be forced. But her people had decided it was necessary, that isolation would eventually lead to extinction as human activity expanded into previously untouched depths. I was the first successful candidate in decades. Others had been offered similar agreements, but most had refused or had proven incompatible with the transfer process. I'd accepted because I'd prioritized the lighthouse over my own safety. That same priority made me suitable for what they needed. Someone who would maintain the connection even as the cost became clear. She released the connection and withdrew into deeper water. I remained on the rocks trying to process what I'd learned. The numbness in my hand wasn't a price being extracted. It was a modification being installed. She wasn't taking from me, she was changing me into something different. I went back inside and examined my left hand under the laboratory lights. The skin appeared normal, no visible changes. But when I held it under running water, I noticed something new. I could sense the water's temperature variation more precisely than I should have been able to. Could detect the slight mineral content difference between the pipes and the ocean supply. The modification was already providing enhanced capabilities. I was losing normal human sensation, but gaining something more specialized. Question was whether I wanted to continue, whether the benefits justified becoming something other than fully human. I spent the next week monitoring the beacon and watching for her return. She didn't appear, though I frequently saw movement in the water that might have been her at distance. On March 22nd, I woke to find another message rendered in that strange chalk on the rocks. Symbols indicating that the next stage of payment would be collected soon, that I should prepare for expanded numbness. I could have left, could have requested transfer to a different lighthouse. abandoned Crowley Point, walked away from the entire agreement. But the beacon was functioning perfectly, ships were passing safely, and I'd already paid the first installment. Leaving would mean incomplete transformation, permanent partial numbness, without any compensating benefits. On March 24th, I found her waiting at the rocks during my dawn patrol. She was holding something, a sealed container, approximately the size of a toolbox, covered in coral and barnacle growth. She placed it on the rocks and gestured for me to open it. Inside were additional components for the lighthouse, backup parts for systems that hadn't failed yet but would eventually need replacement. She was providing ongoing maintenance capability, ensuring the lighthouse could remain functional for years beyond normal equipment lifespan. She placed her hand on the rock, waiting for connection. I joined it, and she showed me the next stage. The numbness would extend from my fingertips to my elbow over the next 2 months. I would lose fine motor control in my left arm, but would gain enhanced ability to sense water composition, temperature gradients, and pressure changes. She asked if I wanted to continue. The question was clear. This was a checkpoint, a moment where I could still refuse further modification. If I stopped now, the numbness would become permanent, but wouldn't progress. I would keep my humanity, but lose full function in my left hand. I thought about the 43 ships that had passed safely since March 12th. I thought about the crew manifest total, 847 people who'd navigated past Crowley Point without incident because the beacon was operational. I thought about the next decade, how many more ships would benefit from a lighthouse that remained functional regardless of funding limitations. I showed her acceptance through the connection. I agreed to continue, to accept the extended numbness, to proceed with the transformation she was implementing. She released my hand and returned to the water. Before diving, she made a gesture that I somehow understood meant approval, perhaps even respect. The numbness began spreading that night. By morning, sensation had decreased to my wrist. By the end of March, it had reached halfway to my elbow. I documented everything in a private journal, separate from my official logs. I recorded the progression rate, the enhanced sensing capabilities that developed alongside the loss, the changes in how I perceived the ocean. I was becoming something different. Not entirely human anymore, but not like her either. Something in between, something new. And I'd made that choice consciously, understanding at least some of the consequences. Whether I'd made the right choice wouldn't be clear for years. But the transformation was now irreversible, and I was committed to seeing where it led. By April 15th, the numbness had extended to my left elbow. I maintained detailed records of the progression. Sensation decreased by approximately 1 centimeter per day, moving steadily from fingertips toward shoulder. The boundary line was always precise, never gradual. On one side, normal feeling. On the other, the muffled distance that had become familiar. But the enhanced capabilities developed faster than I'd expected. By early April, I could detect temperature changes in the ocean of less than 0.2 degrees Celsius from 50 feet away. I knew when storms were approaching 12 hours before weather services issued warnings, sensing the pressure changes through whatever modifications were occurring in my affected nerves. On April 3rd, a fishing vessel approached Crowley Point in deteriorating weather. I sensed the storm front moving in before the crew did, felt the pressure drop through my left arm like physical weight. I radioed the vessel at 4:47 p.m., warned them that conditions would turn severe within 2 hours. The captain thanked me but indicated his weather equipment showed only minor chop expected. The storm hit at 6:23 p.m. Winds reached 54 knots within 15 minutes. The fishing vessel, the Mary Catherine out of Portland, had already altered course based on my warning. They rode out the storm in sheltered water 30 miles south. The captain called me the next morning to thank me for the early alert. Said his own weather systems hadn't registered the front until 5:30 p.m. I didn't tell him how I'd known. I logged it as observed atmospheric conditions indicating weather change and left the details vague. but I understood that the modifications were giving me practical capabilities beyond just lighthouse maintenance. She returned on April 8th, earlier than her previous patterns. I was conducting evening patrol when I saw her near the rocks, approximately 40 feet offshore. She was moving strangely, one arm held close to her body, swimming with difficulty. I descended to the rocks immediately. When she came close enough, I saw the injury. Her right forearm had been partially severed, a deep cut that had torn through muscle nearly to the bone. The wound was recent, still bleeding actively, blood darker than human blood mixing with the seawater around her. She made it to the rocks but couldn't climb out. I went into the water to help her, wading in up to my chest before I could get leverage to support her weight. She was heavier than I remembered, or I was weaker. We struggled for approximately 3 minutes before I managed to help her onto the rocks. I brought the marine mammal kit and began assessing the injury. The cut was worse than it had appeared from distance. Whatever had caused it had torn through muscle, exposed bone, nearly separated her forearm completely. She needed more than basic first aid. I tried to communicate that I needed to take her inside, where I had better equipment, stronger light, proper suturing materials. She didn't understand spoken language, but when I gestured toward the lighthouse, she nodded. A human gesture she'd obviously learned from previous interactions with my kind. Getting her up the path to the lighthouse took nearly 20 minutes. She couldn't walk, could barely crawl. I supported most of her weight, my left arm functioning adequately despite the reduced sensation. By the time we reached the entrance, we were both exhausted. I brought her to my living quarters rather than the work areas. The space was small, one room with basic furniture, a bathroom with a standard tub. I filled the tub with cold water, added salt to approximate ocean salinity, and helped her into it. She submerged completely for approximately 30 seconds, then surfaced and positioned her injured arm on the tub's edge. I worked on the injury for nearly 2 hours. The wound required internal sutures to close muscle tissue, then external staples for the skin. I used local anesthetic, though I wasn't certain it would work on her physiology. She showed no significant pain response during the procedure, just slight finger contractions similar to what I'd observed during our first encounter. While I worked, I asked questions aloud, not expecting answers but needing to process what I was seeing. "What did this to you? Another of your kind? Something human?" She watched me but didn't respond. Couldn't respond without the palm-to-palm connection. When I finished, I placed my right hand near hers, keeping my left hand clear since it was blood-stained from the procedure. She pressed her palm against mine, and the connection opened. She showed me what had happened. A fishing net, specifically a deep-water trawling net, had descended into territory her people used for feeding. She'd been attempting to disable it, cutting through the mesh to free trapped species when the net had suddenly retracted. The heavy cable had caught her arm, the steel wire cutting deep before she could pull free. She showed me the vessel responsible, a commercial fishing boat operating in violation of protected area designations, dragging nets through regions officially designated as marine sanctuaries. Her people had been monitoring the vessel for 3 weeks, documenting repeated violations, unable to stop the damage without revealing themselves. I pulled back from the connection. "How many of your people have been injured by fishing equipment?" I asked, still not expecting direct answer. She placed her palm near mine again. Through the connection, she showed me dozens of injuries over the years. Net entanglements, propeller strikes, hooks embedded in flesh, poisoning from chemical contamination. Her people avoided human activity when possible, but the ocean was finite. Every year, human operations expanded further into territories her people needed for survival. The fishing vessel that injured her was scheduled to return to the same area in 3 days. She showed me its pattern: systematic trawling through the protected zone, consistent violation of regulations, no enforcement response because the violations occurred in deep water where monitoring was minimal. She released the connection and gestured toward her injured arm, then toward the lighthouse beacon visible through the window, then back to herself. She was drawing a parallel. I maintained the lighthouse to protect ships. She was asking if there was a way to protect her people from the ships. I didn't have an answer. I told her she could stay while the injury healed, that I would monitor the wound, provide whatever care was needed. She remained in the tub for the rest of that night, occasionally submerging fully, then surfacing to watch me as I worked on my regular duties. By morning, the wound had begun healing at a rate that seemed faster than human healing. When I checked the sutures at 6:30 a.m., I saw tissue regeneration already beginning, new skin forming at the edges of the wound. Whatever her physiology was, it included accelerated healing capabilities. She stayed for 3 days total. During that time, she showed me more about her people through the Palm connection. Their population was smaller than I'd imagined. She estimated fewer than 2,000 individuals worldwide, concentrated in deep water regions near continental slopes. They lived in loose social structures, small groups of 5 to 15 individuals maintaining territories that overlapped with others. Communication between groups happened during seasonal gatherings, when her people would meet in specific deep water locations to share information, arrange breeding pairs, teach young ones the accumulated knowledge of their species. The gatherings happened twice per year, timed to ocean current patterns that made long-distance travel easier. She showed me their oral history, knowledge passed through generations via the Palm connection. They remembered human contact from thousands of years ago, remembered when surface humans had worshipped them as gods, feared them as demons, hunted them as monsters. They remembered retreating deeper as human technology improved, remembered the decision to maintain silence rather than risk extinction through conflict. But the silence was becoming impossible to maintain. Human activity had reached depths her people had considered safe. Deep-sea mining, submarine cables, research stations, military operations. The ocean was becoming a human space, and her people had nowhere left to retreat to. On April 11th, her arm had healed enough that she could swim normally. She left that evening, returning to the water after pressing her palm to mine one final time. The connection showed gratitude, but also concern. She was worried about the fishing vessel, about whether it would return to harm others of her kind. 2 days later, on April 13th, the fishing vessel she'd shown me was found adrift approximately 50 miles from Crowley Point. The crew of 7 had vanished. No lifeboats missing, no distress signal, no indication of what had happened. Coast Guard investigation concluded that the crew had abandoned ship for unknown reasons, possibly during a medical emergency or mental health crisis. I knew better. I'd seen her people's capability for using acoustic frequencies to compel specific behaviors. I understood what had happened to that crew, though I had no evidence beyond what she'd shown me through our connection. On April 15th, I found a message on the rocks, rendered in her peculiar chalk, symbols indicating that more of her people would be visiting Crowley Point, that I should expect increased contact, that my role was expanding beyond just maintaining the lighthouse. The numbness had reached my shoulder by then. My entire left arm was affected, functioning for gross motor tasks but providing none of the normal tactile feedback. In exchange, I could sense water quality changes, detect marine life at distance through some mechanism I didn't fully understand, feel pressure variations that indicated weather patterns days in advance. I was becoming useful to her people in ways beyond just keeping the lighthouse operational. I was becoming a monitoring station, a sensor positioned at the boundary between their world and mine. And I was beginning to understand that the transformation wasn't just about my body, it was about my purpose, my role, what I was becoming in relation to both species. I woke on March 19th to discover complete numbness from my left wrist to my shoulder. The progression had accelerated overnight, advancing faster than the steady centimeter-per-day rate I'd been documenting. I tested motor function immediately. I could still lift my arm, bend the elbow, make a fist. But sensation was completely gone. No pain, no temperature, no tactile feedback whatsoever. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining the affected limb. Visually, nothing had changed. The skin appeared normal, no discoloration or visible damage. But when I pressed my right thumb into my left forearm with significant force, I felt nothing. The disconnect between visual confirmation and sensory absence created a disorienting effect, as if the arm belonged to someone else. During morning patrol at 6:45 a.m., I saw her in the water below the lighthouse platform. She was vertical, head and shoulders above the surface, watching my window. When she noticed me watching back, she touched her own left shoulder with her right hand, then pointed at me. She was acknowledging that the collection had occurred, that the payment schedule was proceeding as agreed. I descended to the rocks. She swam closer, maintaining a distance of approximately 15 feet, and placed her palm on a partially submerged rock. I knelt and pressed my right hand. I'd learned to avoid using my left hand for the connections, as the reduced sensation made contact unreliable against the wet stone near hers. The connection opened. She showed me what had happened during the night. The transfer hadn't been a natural progression, but a deliberate collection, something she'd initiated while I slept. She'd been in the water below the lighthouse from approximately 2 o'clock a.m. to 4:30 a.m., broadcasting specific frequencies that triggered accelerated neural reorganization in my affected arm. The process was the actual payment mechanism. She would periodically perform these collections, accelerating the transfer in controlled bursts rather than allowing it to progress at the slower natural rate. This gave her people better ability to monitor my adaptation, to ensure the modifications were implementing correctly, to intervene if complications developed. I pulled back from the connection, anger rising. "You didn't tell me you'd be doing this while I was unconscious," I said, knowing she couldn't understand the words but needing to voice the objection anyway. "You didn't ask permission for this specific collection." She placed her hand near mine again, waiting. I rejoined the connection reluctantly. She showed me the terms of our original agreement. I'd accepted that payment would be collected over time, that the process would be gradual, that I wouldn't fully understand each stage until after it occurred. The overnight collection was within those parameters. She hadn't violated the agreement, just implemented it in a way I hadn't anticipated. But she also showed me consideration for my response. Future collections would be signaled in advance when possible, giving me time to prepare. The accelerated overnight transfer had been necessary to test my adaptation response, to confirm my physiology was compatible with the full transformation. Now that compatibility was confirmed, the remaining stages could proceed more slowly. I asked through the connection how many more collections there would be, how long until the transformation completed. She showed me a timeline, approximately 6 more major collections over the next 18 to 24 months, each claiming a different portion of my left side. Left leg next, then left ear, then deeper internal systems. The final collection would involve my left eye, the most complex adaptation. When complete, I would perceive the ocean through my left side the way her people did. Temperature, salinity, pressure, electromagnetic fields, acoustic information beyond human hearing range. My right side would remain human, giving me ability to function in both environments. I would become what she called a bridge walker, someone who could move between surface and deep water, someone who belonged partially to both species. She released the connection and withdrew to deeper water. Before diving, she made a series of gestures I'd learned to recognize: acknowledgement of the collection, confirmation that the lighthouse remained under her people's protection, indication that she would return within 1 week. I spent the remainder of March 19th adjusting to the complete loss of sensation in my left arm. Motor function was intact, but the absence of tactile feedback required conscious attention to tasks I normally performed automatically. I dropped objects frequently, misjudged grip pressure, struggled with fine manipulation, but the enhanced capabilities were remarkable. I could now sense water temperature variations throughout the entire area surrounding Crowley Point, could detect salinity changes that indicated current patterns, could feel pressure differentials that preceded weather changes by days rather than hours. On March 23rd, I sensed a ship in distress before any radio communication. The sensation came through my left arm as a specific type of pressure variation, a pattern I'd learned indicated hull breaching. I monitored the feeling for approximately 15 minutes, confirming it was intensifying rather than diminishing, then contacted Coast Guard to report possible vessel emergency at bearing 237 degrees, approximately 18 nautical miles from Crowley Point. Coast Guard radioed back 20 minutes later, confirming they'd located a cargo vessel, the Northern Star, taking on water from hull damage sustained in collision with debris. The ship's communication equipment had been damaged in the collision. They hadn't been able to send distress signals. My alert had likely saved the crew of 12, who were evacuated before the vessel sank at 2:47 p.m. When asked how I'd known about the emergency, I attributed it to observed changes in water patterns and kept the explanation deliberately vague. The Coast Guard accepted it without further questioning. Lighthouse keepers were expected to have detailed knowledge of local water conditions. My explanation fit within normal parameters. She returned on March 26th, bringing additional equipment for the lighthouse. She placed 3 sealed containers on the rocks, each containing replacement components for systems that would eventually fail. She was providing me with years' worth of spare parts, ensuring the lighthouse could remain operational regardless of official funding or support. Through the Palm connection, she showed me how to install each component, how to recognize when replacement was necessary, how to maintain systems that were technically beyond my official training. She was teaching me to keep the lighthouse functional indefinitely, independent of Coast Guard support. I asked why this was so important to her people, why they invested such effort in maintaining one lighthouse. She showed me the pattern. Crowley Point sat at a critical navigation junction where 3 major shipping lanes converged. Without the beacon, vessels altered course through deeper water, through regions her people used for breeding and feeding. The lighthouse channeled ship traffic away from their most critical territories. Maintaining Crowley Point functional served her people's survival needs directly. Every ship that navigated safely past the lighthouse was a ship that didn't detour through breeding grounds. The investment in keeping me capable of maintaining the beacon was strategic protection of their habitat. She showed me similar arrangements with other lighthouse keepers, other bridge walkers being created at strategic locations along continental coasts. I wasn't unique. I was part of a larger pattern, a network of modified humans being positioned at the boundaries between species. Her people were building an early warning system, a way to monitor human activity and protect critical territories. I pulled back from the connection, feeling manipulated, used. "I'm not your employee," I said. "I didn't agree to be part of some network." She placed her hand near mine again. Through the connection, she showed me that I had agreed, just not explicitly. By accepting the transformation, by allowing the collections, I'd implicitly accepted a role in her people's survival strategy. The collections weren't just payment for lighthouse repairs, they were recruitment, conversion of a human into something that served both species. But she also showed me that I retained choice. At any point, I could refuse further collections, refuse to share information about ship movements or weather patterns, refuse to participate in the protection network. The consequences would be permanent partial transformation without compensating benefits. But the choice was mine. I asked what would happen to me when the transformation completed, whether I would still be recognizable as human. She showed me uncertainty. She didn't know exactly how I would appear or function after the final collection. The process had been attempted before, but previous subjects had developed differently based on individual physiology. Some had remained mostly human in appearance. Others had shifted significantly toward her people's phenotype. I would definitely be able to breathe underwater for extended periods, though not indefinitely. I would require periodic air access, probably every 30 to 40 minutes depending on activity level. I would be able to dive to depths that would kill normal humans, withstand pressure that would crush unmodified bodies. But I would never be fully like her people. I lacked too many of their specialized adaptations, had started the transformation too late in life. She released the connection and returned to the water. I remained on the rocks, trying to reconcile what I'd learned. I wasn't just becoming something different. I was becoming part of a system, a network, a strategy for species survival that I'd agreed to without fully understanding the implications. On March 28th, the numbness began spreading to my left leg. I felt the characteristic reduction of sensation starting at my toes, moving upward at approximately the same rate the arm transfer had progressed. I documented it in my private journal, noting that the second major collection was beginning ahead of the schedule she'd indicated. By April 2nd, numbness had reached my left knee. Motor function remained intact, but walking required conscious attention to balance and foot placement. I adapted by adjusting my gait, compensating for the sensory loss with visual confirmation and increased reliance on my right side. The enhanced capabilities extended to the leg as well. I could sense vibrations through the ground that indicated seismic activity, could detect pressure changes in underground water tables, could feel magnetic field variations that affected local wildlife behavior. My left side was becoming a sophisticated sensor array, while my right side remained baseline human. I was becoming asymmetric, divided, two different beings occupying one body. And I'd agreed to continue the process for another 18 months through 5 more collections until the transformation completed and I became whatever I was going to become. The payment was being extracted exactly as agreed, and I had no one to blame but myself for accepting terms I hadn't fully understood. By June 2020, the numbness had consumed my entire left leg. The collection occurred on May 14th, accelerated like the arm transfer. I went to sleep with sensation to mid-thigh and woke with complete loss from hip to toes. She'd been in the water during the night again, broadcasting frequencies that reorganized neural pathways while I remained unconscious. I tested motor function immediately upon waking. I could stand, walk, maintain balance. But without tactile feedback from my left foot, walking required constant visual monitoring. I watched my left leg with each step, consciously placing the foot, checking angle and pressure. Within 3 days, the compensation became automatic. My brain adapted faster than I'd expected. The enhanced sensing capabilities in my left leg exceeded what I'd experienced with my arm. I could detect seismic vibrations through bedrock beneath the lighthouse, feel tidal forces as pressure variations in underground aquifers, sense electromagnetic fields generated by fault lines and mineral deposits. When I stood on the rocks near the ocean, my left side perceived the water as a complex 3-dimensional structure of temperature layers, salinity gradients, and current patterns. On May 19th, I sensed an earthquake 12 hours before it occurred. The sensation came as rhythmic pressure pulses through my left leg, a pattern I'd never experienced before. I documented it in my private journal. Unusual vibration pattern detected at 6:23 a.m., increasing in intensity through morning. The earthquake hit at 6:47 p.m., magnitude 4.2. Epicenter approximately 140 miles offshore. No damage at Crowley Point, but coastal communities to the south reported minor structural damage. I called the seismology department at the nearest university, reported that I'd detected precursor vibrations hours before the event. The researcher I spoke with was skeptical but interested. I explained it as sensitivity to ground vibrations developed through years of lighthouse keeping and avoided any mention of the actual mechanism. They took my contact information, said they'd reach out if similar events occurred. She returned on May 22nd, this time accompanied by 2 others of her kind. They remained at distance, approximately 50 feet offshore, while she approached the rocks alone. When she placed her palm near mine for connection, she showed me why she'd brought witnesses. The transformation was progressing successfully, better than previous attempts with other humans. Her people wanted to document my adaptation, study the modifications, understand why this implementation was working when others had failed. The 2 observers were what she called memory keepers, individuals responsible for maintaining her people's accumulated knowledge through the palm connection system. I looked at the two figures in the water. One was larger than her, probably male based on broader shoulder structure. The other was smaller, younger perhaps. Both watched without approaching, their completely black eyes tracking my movements with obvious intelligence. Through the connection, she asked permission for the memory keepers to connect with me, to experience my perceptions directly, to record how I was adapting to the modifications. I asked what would happen during such a connection, whether they would just observe or whether they would have access to all my memories, private thoughts, personal history. She showed me that the connection depth was controllable. I could allow surface-level observation without granting access to deeper memories. But full documentation required deeper connection, sharing not just current sensations, but the complete experience of transformation, my fears, doubts, physical pain, emotional responses to losing portions of my humanity. I considered refusing. The idea of allowing strangers access to my private experience felt like violation, exposure beyond what I'd agreed to. But I thought about the other humans she'd mentioned, previous transformation attempts that had failed. If sharing my experience helped future candidates survive the process, if it prevented others from experiencing worse complications, then the invasion of privacy served a purpose. I agreed to full connection. She gestured to the two observers, who swam closer. All three placed their palms on rocks near mine. I pressed my right hand into position, and the connection opened with unusual intensity. 3 minds touched mine simultaneously. The sensation was overwhelming. Instead of one stream of information flowing between 2 individuals, I experienced multiple perspectives converging. I felt the memory keepers recording my current state, cataloging the exact boundary between my modified left side and unmodified right side, measuring my enhanced sensing capabilities, documenting my motor function adaptations. But they also pulled deeper, accessing memories I hadn't consciously thought about in years. They saw my decision to become a lighthouse keeper, reviewed my 18 years of service, examined every moment of my encounter with her. They experienced my fear when I'd first seen her, my doubt when accepting the agreement, my growing unease as the collections progressed. The process lasted approximately 8 minutes. When they released the connection, I collapsed backward onto the rocks, exhausted. The memory keepers returned to deeper water immediately. She remained, placing her palm near mine one more time. Through a brief connection, she showed me gratitude. The documentation was complete, successful, more detailed than they'd achieved with previous subjects. The information would be preserved in their collective memory, shared among her people, used to improve future transformation attempts. I asked how many others like me existed currently, how many bridge walkers were functional. She showed me 12 locations along North American coasts, 8 along European coasts, 5 in Asia, 25 humans undergoing transformation at various stages. 7 had completed the full process and were functioning as successful bridges between species. The others were still in early or middle stages. She showed me one of the completed bridge walkers, a woman in her 40s, formerly a marine researcher in Norway, now living partially underwater in a facility her people had constructed in a deep fjord. The woman spent 3 days per week in the deep facility, 4 days in a surface research station, coordinating protection efforts for North Atlantic breeding grounds. That was my eventual trajectory. Not abandoning the lighthouse, but dividing time between surface duties and underwater work with her people. The transformation was creating a dual existence, dual identity, dual loyalty. She released the connection and returned to the water. The 2 memory keepers were already gone, disappeared into depths where light didn't penetrate. I climbed back to the lighthouse, my left leg functioning adequately despite complete loss of sensation, and tried to process what I'd agreed to. On June 3rd, I received official notice from Coast Guard headquarters. An inspection team would visit Crowley Point on June 15th to assess lighthouse condition and keeper performance. Standard procedure. Inspections occurred approximately every 18 months. But the timing concerned me. My left arm and leg were fully numb, my gait was noticeably altered, and I had no legitimate explanation for the physical changes. I spent the next 12 days practicing normal movement patterns, trying to walk without the compensatory adjustments I'd developed. I wore long sleeves despite warm weather, hiding the fact that my left arm sometimes hung differently than my right. I rehearsed explanations for any observable differences: old injury, nerve damage from a fall, nothing that affected my ability to perform duties. The inspection team arrived at 9:17 a.m. on June 15th, 2 Coast Guard officers and 1 civilian contractor specializing in Lighthouse systems evaluation. They spent 4 hours examining the facility, testing equipment, reviewing my maintenance logs. The beacon system drew particular attention. The contractor noted that several components had been replaced with parts that didn't match standard Coast Guard inventory. I explained that I'd sourced replacement parts from maritime salvage suppliers, that official requisition timelines were too slow for critical repairs. The contractor accepted the explanation but recommended I clear future modifications through proper channels. He noted in his report that the beacon was functioning above expected parameters for equipment of this age. The officers interviewed me about my maintenance routines, emergency procedures, interaction with maritime traffic. One asked about the Northern Star rescue, how I detected the vessel's distress before any radio communication. I repeated my earlier explanation about observing water patterns, about developing sensitivity to ocean conditions through years of experience. He seemed satisfied. The inspection concluded at 1:34 p.m. with a positive rating. The team noted exceptional equipment maintenance and superior navigational support to local maritime traffic. They recommended continued assignment, no deficiencies requiring correction. I was officially cleared for another 18 months. After they left, I found her waiting at the rocks. Through the palm connection, she showed me that she'd been monitoring the inspection from underwater, ready to intervene if the situation had turned against me. Her people had ways of creating distractions, equipment malfunctions, weather changes, acoustic phenomena that could redirect attention away from concerning observations. I asked what would have happened if the inspectors had discovered the modifications, if they'd realized I was undergoing transformation. She showed me contingency plans. I would have been removed from the lighthouse, probably placed in medical evaluation, eventually dismissed from service. Her people would have helped me disappear, brought me to one of their underwater facilities, completed the transformation in isolation from human oversight. But that outcome was undesirable. Bridgewalkers served both species best by maintaining their surface positions, their official roles, their legitimate access to human systems and information. My value was greatest as an active lighthouse keeper who could also function as liaison with her people. On June 28th, the numbness began in my left ear. I woke at 4:12 a.m. with reduced hearing on my left side, a muffled quality to all sounds from that direction. By evening, hearing loss was significant. I could detect loud sounds but not subtle audio. By July 5th, my left ear was completely deaf to airborne sound, but the compensation was remarkable. I began perceiving sounds through water with extraordinary clarity. When I stood near the ocean, my left ear detected acoustic information transmitted through moisture in the air, through humidity, through the connection between atmosphere and sea. I heard whale songs from distances that should have been impossible, heard ship propellers from miles away, heard the clicking communications of dolphin pods passing in deep water. My left side was becoming aquatic sense organs, while my right side remained terrestrial. I was developing genuine bilateral specialization, one side adapted for each environment. The asymmetry was becoming profound, not just different sensation, but different perception, different understanding of reality depending on which side I oriented toward a stimulus. On July 19th, I used my left ear hearing to detect a submarine passing at extreme depth, approximately 2,200 meters down, based on the acoustic signature. I tracked it for 43 minutes as it moved through the region. Military vessel, probably research or surveillance rather than combat. It was traveling through areas her people used for feeding. She appeared that evening. Through the connection, she showed me that her people had been monitoring the submarine, that it had been mapping the ocean floor in their territory for 6 days. The submarine's sonar was causing disruption. Her people's communication depended on acoustic frequencies, and the military sonar overwhelmed their natural signals. I asked if there was anything I could do, any way to report the submarine's presence through official channels without revealing how I knew about it. She showed me that intervention was dangerous. Reporting submarine movements raised security questions, attracted investigation. Better to document and monitor, providing her people with information about the submarine's pattern so they could avoid its sonar range. I spent the next week tracking the submarine whenever it came within my sensing range. I documented its course, timing, patrol pattern. On July 27th, I provided the information to her through our connection. She showed me gratitude, explained that her people would adjust their breeding schedules to avoid the submarine's documented route. By August 2020, I'd lost sensation in my entire left arm, left leg, and left ear. Motor function remained intact, but I was essentially half numb, perceiving the world through my right side while my left side perceived the ocean. I was adapting to the division, learning to integrate 2 different streams of sensory input into coherent understanding. The collections were proceeding on schedule. 3 major stages complete, 3 remaining. Left eye, deeper internal systems, and a final collection she hadn't yet explained completely. 18 more months, give or take. Then I would become whatever I was becoming, and my life would permanently divide between lighthouse keeping and whatever underwater role her people needed me to fill. I was 52 years old. I'd kept Crowley Point for 18 years as a human. I would keep it for however many years remained as something else, something between human and whatever her people were. The transformation was irreversible, the choice already made. I could only move forward and discover what I would become. Between March 2019 and October 2020, I documented 43 vessels that altered course based on the Crowley Point beacon. I maintained detailed records in my private journal, ship names, dates, approximate crew counts. What would have happened if the lighthouse had remained dark? The list became evidence that the bargain served its purpose. The modifications I was undergoing had direct correlation to lives saved. The first significant rescue occurred on September 8, 2020. A cargo vessel, the Pacific Dawn, encountered engine failure during storm conditions at 11:47 p.m. They'd issued a distress call, but their position was uncertain due to GPS malfunction. Coast Guard requested that all area lighthouses monitor for visual or acoustic contact. I detected them through my left ear acoustic sensing at 11:52 p.m., approximately 8 miles southeast of Crowley Point. The ship's hull was broadcasting specific vibration patterns through the water: engine cavitation, propeller damage, steering failure. I called Coast Guard with precise coordinates, bearing, and estimated drift rate based on current patterns I was sensing through my left leg. Coast Guard responded at 12:34 a.m., located the Pacific Dawn at exactly the coordinates I'd provided. They evacuated the crew of 19 before the vessel ran aground on rocks 3 miles south of its disabled position. The captain later stated that without the precise location data, they wouldn't have been found in time. The storm would have driven them onto the rocks while still aboard. I received official commendation from Coast Guard for exceptional navigational support during emergency operations. The commendation letter praised my detailed knowledge of local water conditions and acoustic patterns. They didn't know I was detecting the ship through modified sensory organs that shouldn't exist in human physiology. She appeared the next day, bringing 2 others with her. Through the Palm connection, she showed me that her people had been monitoring the Pacific Dawn situation, ready to intervene if the ship had begun sinking with crew still aboard. They'd been positioned underwater near the vessel, prepared to guide survivors toward air pockets or shallow water. I asked if her people had ever actually rescued human survivors from shipwrecks, if they'd saved lives directly rather than just clearing debris or disabling dangerous equipment. She showed me 3 incidents in the past decade: a fishing vessel that sank in 2015, a research ship that foundered in 2017, a yacht that capsized in 2019. In each case, her people had found survivors in the water and guided them toward rescue ships or shore using acoustic calls that the humans experienced as compulsion to swim in specific directions. But she also showed me complications. In 2015, one of the fishing vessel's survivors had died despite guidance toward rescue. The water temperature caused hypothermia faster than the distance could be covered. In 2017, 2 research ship crew members had panicked during guidance, fighting the compulsion, exhausting themselves. 1 drowned. In 2019, the yacht survivors had made it to shore but reported hearing voices that led them, creating media attention her people hadn't anticipated. Direct rescue was difficult, dangerous, often unsuccessful. Her people could guide, but couldn't physically carry adult humans through water for extended distances. The acoustic compulsion could overcome drowning panic sometimes, but not always. And every rescue risked exposure, risked revealing that something intelligent was operating in the ocean. The Lighthouse system was more effective. By preventing ships from encountering hazards in the first place, by guiding them away from dangerous areas, the beacon saved lives without requiring direct intervention. That's why her people invested in maintaining lighthouses, in creating bridge walkers who could keep the systems operational. She showed me the network I was part of. 25 bridge walkers at various transformation stages, positioned at strategic lighthouses along shipping routes. Collectively, they'd prevented an estimated 140 shipwrecks over the past decade, saved approximately 3,400 lives through navigation guidance. The number was imprecise. Many prevented disasters went unnoticed, ships that passed safely through areas that would have been fatal without functioning beacons. I pulled back from the connection and asked, what happens when shipping companies develop better GPS? When automation makes lighthouses obsolete? What happens when my role here becomes unnecessary? She placed her palm near mine again. Through the connection, she showed me that automation was already reducing lighthouse importance in some regions. But deep water navigation still required backup systems, still needed physical landmarks for verification. Lighthouses would remain relevant for decades, maybe longer. And by then, bridge walkers would have expanded into other roles: maritime research, environmental monitoring, positions that provided legitimate access to ocean systems while serving her people's needs. The transformation wasn't just about keeping one lighthouse functional, it was about establishing permanent human representatives who could operate in both environments, who could coordinate protection efforts, who could warn her people about dangerous human activities before those activities caused irreversible damage. On October 3rd, I detected another submarine, this one traveling much deeper than the previous contact, approximately 3,100 meters down, near the limit of military submarine operating depth. But the acoustic signature was wrong, didn't match standard propulsion systems. I tracked it for 26 minutes before realizing what I was detecting. Not a submarine, but a submersible, probably research or commercial, descending into the trench system. I contacted her that evening through the emergency signal she'd taught me, a specific stone arrangement on the rocks that indicated urgent communication needed. She appeared within 40 minutes, faster response than normal. Through the connection, I showed her what I'd detected. She reacted with something I'd never seen from her before: fear. The submersible was descending into breeding grounds her people were actively using, areas that needed to remain undisturbed for another 6 weeks until current egg clutches matured enough to survive disturbance. I asked what would happen if the submersible reached the breeding grounds. She showed me. The lights, noise, and physical presence would cause adult guardians to flee, abandoning eggs that required constant attendance. Without guardians maintaining proper water circulation and protection from predators, the entire clutch would die, approximately 140 eggs representing 2 years of reproductive effort by her community. She showed me the submersible's trajectory and timing. It would reach the breeding grounds in approximately 8 hours. Her people couldn't stop it through normal means. They could disable equipment, but not quickly enough at that depth, not without risking human casualties that would trigger investigation. They needed a way to redirect the submersible without revealing their presence. I thought about options. I could contact Coast Guard, report an unauthorized submersible in protected waters, trigger an investigation. But investigation would take days, too slow to prevent the intrusion. I could try reaching the submersible operator directly, but I had no way to identify which research institution or company was running the dive. Then I remembered the submarine I'd tracked in July, the military vessel that had been mapping the region. I still had contact information for the seismology researcher who'd been interested in my earthquake prediction. I called her at 8:47 p.m., apologized for the late contact, and told her I was detecting unusual seismic activity in the trench system, patterns suggesting potential underwater landslide risk. She was skeptical initially, but I provided specific coordinates, depth information, and technical details about the vibration patterns I was allegedly detecting. I emphasized that the activity was concentrated exactly where the submersible would reach in approximately 7 hours. I suggested that any deep water operations in that region should be postponed for at least 72 hours until the activity stabilized. She said she would check with colleagues, run it through their monitoring systems, see if any scheduled operations needed alert. I gave her my direct number and asked her to call back with confirmation. Then I waited. The call came at 10:34 p.m. The researcher informed me that there was indeed a deep water research dive scheduled in that region, operated by a marine geology team from UC San Diego. She'd contacted them with my warning, provided the specific coordinates of the alleged seismic activity. The team had decided to postpone the dive for 48 hours while they verified the risk through their own monitoring. I thanked her and hung up. Then I went to the rocks and signaled her. She appeared quickly. She'd been waiting nearby, monitoring the situation. Through the connection, I showed her what I'd done, how I'd prevented the submersible from reaching the breeding grounds. She showed me something I hadn't expected. She was crying. Not visibly, not with tears, but through the connection I felt profound relief, gratitude, something close to the emotion humans would call love. The eggs in those breeding grounds included her own genetic contribution. She had personal investment in their survival beyond just species preservation. I pulled back from the connection, uncomfortable with the emotional intensity. She remained at the rocks for approximately 10 more minutes, just looking at me, then returned to the water without further communication. Over the next week, I received 3 separate thank you calls. The seismology researcher called to tell me that while their instruments hadn't detected the activity I'd reported, a small underwater landslide had indeed occurred in the region 46 hours after my warning, after the planned dive time, exactly where the submersible would have been operating. My detection had potentially saved the 3-person crew from being caught in the slide. UC San Diego called to thank me for the early warning, said they were reviewing their dive safety protocols based on my input. The Coast Guard called to commend me again, noted that I seemed to have unusual sensitivity to oceanographic conditions, and asked if I would be willing to participate in a regional early warning system they were developing. I declined the formal participation but offered to continue providing alerts when I detected concerning patterns. They accepted, added my contact information to their emergency response network. I'd successfully established myself as a legitimate source of oceanographic information without revealing the actual mechanism of detection. On October 23rd, I found a gift on the rocks. A sealed container filled with what appeared to be pearls, approximately 200 of them, ranging from gray to black. Through our next connection, she explained that these were from her people, gratitude for preventing the breeding ground intrusion. The pearls were significant to her culture. Each one represented an individual's acknowledgement of debt, a promise of future assistance if needed. I tried to refuse them, explained that I'd helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected payment. She showed me that refusing would be insulting, that her people needed to acknowledge the debt formally. The pearls weren't payment, they were relationship markers, evidence that I'd proven myself trustworthy beyond our original agreement. I kept them in a drawer in my living quarters. They looked like normal pearls, nothing obviously unusual, but each one represented a member of her community who'd formally acknowledged me as friend rather than threat, who'd voted to trust me with their survival. By November 2020, my list of prevented disasters had grown to 43 documented cases. But I'd also begun tracking a different number, 7 instances where I'd provided information to her people that helped them avoid human activity, 17 instances where I'd helped coordinate protection of their territories, 3 instances where I'd deliberately misled official authorities to prevent them from investigating areas her people were using. I was becoming less human and more bridge. My loyalty was splitting, dividing between the species I'd been born to and the species I was becoming part of. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was changing who I considered us and who I considered them. On December 4, 2020, the numbness began in my left eye. I woke at 5:18 a.m. with blurred vision, the left eye producing images that were dim, unfocused, increasingly difficult to resolve into clear shapes. By evening, vision in my left eye had degraded to light/dark, differentiation only. I could tell when something blocked light sources, but I couldn't see details, couldn't read, couldn't recognize faces. By December 11th, my left eye was completely blind by normal standards. No color perception, no shape recognition, nothing that would register as vision by human definition. But something else was developing, something that took me 3 days to understand. On December 14th, I stood at the window of my quarters, looking out at the ocean, or trying to look at it with both eyes. My right eye showed me the normal view: gray water, white caps, the horizon line dividing sea from sky. My left eye showed me something different. I saw temperature, not as colors or abstract visualization, but as direct perception. The ocean appeared as a three-dimensional structure of thermal layers, visible to my left eye, without any technological mediation. I could see where cold, deep water met warmer surface water, see the boundary layers, see thermal plumes rising from underwater vents 3 miles away. I closed my right eye, opened only my left. The world became thermal structure. The lighthouse wall appeared as retained heat, warmer than the ambient air. The rocks below held residual warmth from afternoon sun. The ocean was a complex flowing pattern of temperature gradients moving in currents I could now see directly. I opened my right eye again, tried to process both input streams simultaneously. My brain struggled initially. The two eyes were providing incompatible information, different representations of the same physical space. But over the next week, integration began. I learned to perceive the normal visual world through my right eye, while simultaneously perceiving the thermal structure through my left. She appeared on December 19th. I descended to the rocks, and before she could initiate connection, I gestured toward my left eye and tried to explain through motion and expression what I was experiencing. She understood immediately, placed her palm near mine. Through the connection, she showed me that the eye modification was the most complex adaptation, the transformation that most clearly demonstrated whether a bridge walker candidate would successfully complete the process. Previous candidates had often failed at this stage. Their brains couldn't integrate the disparate sensory inputs, couldn't process human vision and thermal perception simultaneously. I asked how many candidates had failed at this stage. She showed me 4 out of the 11 who'd reached eye modification. 2 had experienced complete sensory collapse, unable to process either type of vision. 1 had developed severe neurological problems, seizures triggered by conflicting inputs. The 4th had simply refused to continue, choosing to remain partially transformed rather than risk the final stages. The successful candidates, 7 currently functional bridge walkers, had all demonstrated ability to integrate the modified vision within 3 weeks. I was on day 11, progressing faster than average. The integration would become more sophisticated over time. Eventually, I would be able to switch dominance between eyes consciously, emphasizing thermal perception when useful, defaulting to normal vision for regular tasks. She showed me practical applications. The thermal vision detected living creatures by their heat signatures, saw them through murky water or complete darkness. I could track fish, schools, detect marine mammals, see her people moving underwater regardless of visibility conditions. The modification made me capable of functioning as a lookout, monitoring the ocean for both human activity and marine life presence. But there was a cost. The modification was changing my brain structure, creating new neural pathways, fundamentally altering how I processed visual information. The changes were permanent. Even if the transformation stopped now, my left eye would never return to normal human vision. I would retain thermal perception for the rest of my life. I asked if she considered that fair exchange, permanent alteration of my brain in exchange for lighthouse maintenance. She showed me that the exchange had never been primarily about the lighthouse. That was initial justification, the transaction that established relationship. The actual exchange was about creating permanent bridges between species, about ensuring her people had human representatives who could function in both worlds. The lighthouse was important tactically, but I was important strategically. When the transformation completed, I would be one of 8 functional bridge walkers globally, part of a tiny population that could coordinate protection efforts, provide early warning of dangerous human activities, help negotiate the expanding conflict between species over ocean resources. She released the connection and gestured toward the water. She wanted me to try the thermal vision in practical application to understand what I could now detect. I followed her along the rocks to a position directly above deep water. She pointed down, indicating I should look. I closed my right eye, relied only on thermal perception through my left. The water appeared as layered structure, temperature differentials marking depth zones. At approximately 40 feet down, I saw 3 heat signatures, living creatures, probably her people, maintaining position in the cold water. Their body temperature was lower than human baseline, but higher than ambient water, making them visible as distinct forms against the thermal background. One of them gestured, and I saw the motion as thermal redistribution, warmer surface skin sliding across cooler, deeper muscle tissue. They were testing whether I could see them, whether the modification had granted the capability she'd promised. I raised my hand, waved to indicate I could see them clearly. All 3 moved in response, complex motion patterns that created beautiful thermal traces in the water. They were performing, showing me what I could now perceive, welcoming me to a way of seeing that they'd possessed naturally and I'd been granted artificially. I opened my right eye and they disappeared. Normal vision showed only dark water, no hint of the 3 figures hovering 40 feet down. I closed my right eye again and they reappeared as thermal signatures. I was beginning to understand the dual nature of my developing perception, how I could switch between human and modified vision depending on what information I needed. Over the next month, I practiced integrating the thermal vision into daily routines. I could see ships approaching Crowley Point by their thermal signatures before they appeared on the horizon, hot engines visible at extreme range through my left eye. I could detect marine life, tracking whales and dolphins by their body heat. I could see weather patterns forming, see the thermal dynamics of storm systems developing offshore. On January 8, 2021, I prevented another shipwreck using only thermal vision. Heavy fog had reduced visibility to less than 30 feet, completely obscuring the normal view through my right eye. But through my left eye, I saw a fishing vessel's engine heat signature approaching the rocks south of the lighthouse at 11:47 p.m. The vessel was off course, heading directly toward hazard areas. I radioed them immediately, provided corrected bearing, guided them away from the rocks using only what I could see through thermal perception. They made it safely past the hazard and continued on course. The captain thanked me, said his GPS had been malfunctioning, that he'd been navigating by dead reckoning in the fog. Without my guidance, he would have lost his vessel and possibly his crew of 4. I added them to my list: 44 ships, 3,147 people. The modifications were proving their value, demonstrating that the transformation served legitimate purpose beyond just species survival politics. She appeared on January 15th with information that concerned her. Through the connection, she showed me satellite imagery. Apparently, her people had ways of accessing human technological systems I hadn't understood previously. The imagery showed expanded deep-sea mining operations, new equipment being deployed in the Pacific, scheduled operations that would begin in March in areas her people considered critical habitat. I asked what she wanted me to do about it. I was a lighthouse keeper, not someone with authority to stop mining operations. She showed me that bridge walkers weren't expected to stop such operations directly, just to provide early warning, to help her people prepare defensive responses, to monitor equipment, and report on operational patterns. But she also showed me something more complex. Bridge walkers who'd completed transformation often developed sufficient standing in maritime communities that their environmental concerns were taken seriously. The Norwegian bridge walker I'd seen previously had successfully lobbied for expanded marine protection zones, preventing mining in several critical areas. The process was slow, gradual, required years of building credibility, but it was possible. That would be my eventual role, not just keeping the lighthouse functional, but using whatever authority and credibility I developed to protect ocean territories her people needed. The transformation wasn't creating a servant of her people. It was creating an advocate, someone who understood both human and aquatic perspectives, someone who could argue for protection because they had legitimate standing in both communities. I asked when the final stages of transformation would occur, when I would complete the process and begin that advocacy role. She showed me timeline. The next major collection would occur in March, claiming deeper internal systems, primarily circulation and respiratory modifications that would allow extended underwater operation. The final collection would occur approximately 6 months after that, September or October 2021, completing the full transformation. After final collection, I would spend 3 months in deep water training, learning to function fully in underwater environments, developing skills her people mastered in childhood, but I would need to learn as an adult. Then I would return to the lighthouse, dividing time between surface duties and underwater work, beginning the advocacy role gradually as I built credibility in environmental protection communities. I pulled back from the connection. 18 more months, 2 more collections, 3 months of underwater training. Then the rest of my life split between 2 worlds, 2 species, 2 sets of obligations. What happens if I refuse the final stages? I asked aloud, knowing she couldn't understand the words but needing to voice the question. She placed her palm near mine again. Through the connection, she showed me that refusal was still possible, that I could stop at any stage. But stopping now would leave me permanently with thermal vision, permanently with reduced sensation in 3 limbs and 1 ear, permanently divided between human and modified perception without completing the transition to full functionality. The modifications already implemented were sufficient that I couldn't return to normal human life. But they were insufficient for comfortable existence in either world without completing the final stages. I could function as I was, but uncomfortably, incompletely, forever marked as something between categories. She released the connection and returned to the water. I remained on the rocks, watching her thermal signature descend into depths, thinking about the choice that was rapidly becoming no choice at all. I'd already transformed too much to go back. The only direction left was forward, toward whatever I would become. On February 3rd, 2021, I received a letter from my sister. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. Family contact had decreased gradually since I'd taken the lighthouse keeper position. The letter was brief, updating me on her life, asking if I was doing well, suggesting that maybe we could reconnect, possibly schedule a visit in the spring. I read the letter 3 times, trying to compose a response in my mind. What could I tell her? That I was fine? That lighthouse keeping suited me? That nothing significant had changed? Or that I was undergoing transformation into something that wasn't entirely human anymore, that I'd made a bargain I couldn't undo, that I might not be fully recognizable as her brother within another year? I filed the letter in my desk drawer and didn't respond. The silence felt like a small death, a relationship ending not through conflict but through my inability to explain what I'd become. On February 17th, I had a nightmare. In it, I was underwater, unable to surface, drowning slowly while something with her face watched without helping. I woke at 3:42 a.m., breathing hard, left side completely numb, right side soaked with sweat. The dream wasn't subtle. My subconscious was processing fear I'd been suppressing during waking hours. I got up and stood at the window, looking out at the ocean through both eyes simultaneously. Through my right eye, dark water, stars reflected on calm surface. Through my left eye, thermal layers, cold depths, the heat signatures of 3 of her people maintaining position approximately 200 feet offshore, probably monitoring the lighthouse as they did most nights now. I was being watched constantly. Protected, they would claim. Monitored, from my perspective. The boundary between the 2 interpretations was becoming uncomfortably thin. On March 2nd, she appeared during daylight for the first time in months. 9:34 a.m., unusual timing that indicated urgency. I descended to the rocks immediately. She placed her palm on the stone without waiting for me to initiate contact. Through the connection, she showed me a problem. The next collection was scheduled for March 15th, the respiratory and circulatory modifications that would allow extended underwater operation. But there was a complication. The modifications required approximately 72 hours of complete immersion, 3 days underwater without surfacing, while the changes implemented. That meant abandoning the lighthouse for 3 days, leaving it unattended, violating every operational protocol I'd maintained for 18 years. She showed me that her people would monitor the beacon, would handle basic maintenance, would ensure no ships were endangered. But I would be absent, unreachable, potentially in medical crisis if the modifications caused complications. I pulled back from the connection. "No," I said aloud. "I can't leave the lighthouse unattended for 3 days. That's not negotiable." She placed her palm near mine again, insistent. Through the connection, she showed me that this collection couldn't be postponed, couldn't be done in stages. The respiratory and circulatory systems had to transform together, simultaneously, or the modifications would conflict and potentially cause fatal complications. Previous candidates who tried to stage these changes had died during the process. I asked if she was saying I had to choose between my role as lighthouse keeper and survival through the transformation. She showed me that those were indeed the options. Accept the 3-day absence and complete the collection successfully, or refuse the collection and remain permanently incomplete, increasingly dysfunctional in both environments. I withdrew from the connection and climbed back to the lighthouse without responding. I spent the next week trying to find alternative solutions. I contacted Coast Guard, requested personal leave for family emergency, was told that lighthouse keepers couldn't take unscheduled leave without arranging replacement staff. Replacement staff required 2 weeks' notice minimum. I called the regional lighthouse keeper coordinator, explained I had urgent personal matters requiring 3 days away. He was sympathetic but firm. Regulations didn't allow unattended lighthouses under any circumstances. If I needed leave, I had to request it through official channels with proper advance notice. I had no legitimate way to abandon the lighthouse for 3 days, and I had no way to undergo the necessary modifications without that abandonment. The transformation had reached a point where it conflicted directly with my primary obligation. On March 11th, I made a decision. I would refuse the collection, would stop the transformation at this stage, would accept permanent incomplete modification rather than violate my duty to maintain the lighthouse. The choice felt right, felt like reclaiming agency I'd surrendered when I'd accepted the original bargain. I signaled her that evening, the emergency arrangement that brought her quickly to the rocks. Through the connection, I showed her my decision. I would not proceed with the March 15th collection, would not abandon the lighthouse, would remain in my current state regardless of the long-term consequences. She showed me sadness, disappointment, but not anger. She'd known refusal was possible, had accepted that risk when selecting me for the transformation. She asked if I would reconsider, if there was any condition under which I would change my decision. I showed her that my commitment to the lighthouse superseded my commitment to the transformation. If I couldn't fulfill both obligations, I would prioritize the one I'd held for 18 years over the one I'd accepted 2 years ago. She withdrew from the connection and remained at the rocks, just looking at me. After approximately 5 minutes of silence, she dove beneath the surface and disappeared. Over the next 3 days, I waited for some response, some indication of what her people thought about my refusal. Nothing came. The ocean remained empty of her kind. The thermal signatures I'd grown accustomed to seeing at night were absent. On March 15th, the scheduled collection date, I woke at dawn and conducted normal routines. No numbness, no changes, no indication that anything had been attempted during the night. She'd accepted my refusal, but by March 18th, I began noticing problems. The respiratory efficiency I'd developed over the past 2 years was degrading. I found myself breathless after climbing stairs, fatigued after moderate exertion, occasionally dizzy without apparent cause. The modifications already implemented were apparently unstable without the completion of the full respiratory system transformation. On March 22nd, I collapsed during exterior maintenance, unconscious for approximately 8 minutes before regaining awareness. I radioed Coast Guard, reported a medical incident, was instructed to seek immediate evaluation at the mainland facility. I refused. I told them I'd recovered, that it was probably dehydration, that I would monitor the situation carefully. They insisted I at least consult with a physician via telemedicine. I agreed to schedule a consultation. The telemedicine appointment occurred on March 24th. I spoke with Dr. Sarah Chen, a Coast Guard medical officer, and described my symptoms carefully. Intermittent breathlessness, fatigue, occasional dizziness. I omitted everything about the transformation, the modifications, the numbness in my left side. She asked detailed questions about my left arm and leg. Apparently, my movement patterns during the video call had been noticeably asymmetric. I attributed it to old injuries, nerve damage from a fall several years ago. She recommended in-person neurological evaluation, said the symptoms suggested potentially serious underlying conditions. I promised to schedule evaluation when I could arrange proper leave time. She made me promise I would report immediately if symptoms worsened. I agreed, knowing I wouldn't follow through. On March 27th, she returned. I was conducting evening patrol when I saw her thermal signature approaching the rocks. I descended slowly, my breathing labored from the exertion. She waited until I reached her position. Through the connection, she showed me what was happening. The incomplete transformation had created systemic instabilities. The modified portions of my body required different oxygen levels, different circulation patterns than the unmodified portions. Without completing the respiratory and circulatory changes, the existing modifications were slowly causing system-wide failure. Timeline: I had approximately 6 weeks before the instabilities caused permanent damage. After that point, no intervention would help. I would remain in declining health until eventually the conflicting systems caused fatal complications. Estimated survival time if left untreated, 8 to 14 months. She showed me the choice again: complete the transformation within the next few weeks, or accept that I'd chosen to die maintaining the lighthouse. No other options existed. The transformation couldn't be reversed, couldn't be stabilized at the current stage, couldn't be paused indefinitely while I resolved the lighthouse staffing problem. I pulled back from the connection, anger rising. "You didn't tell me it would be fatal to stop partway. You said I could refuse at any stage." She placed her palm near mine again. Through the connection, she showed me that she had told me. During one of our early exchanges, she'd indicated that incomplete transformation would cause permanent damage. But I hadn't asked for specifics, hadn't requested details about what permanent damage meant practically. She'd answered the questions I'd asked, but I hadn't asked the right questions. I withdrew from the connection and sat on the rocks, trying to process the situation. I could complete the transformation and survive, but abandon my post for 3 days. Or I could maintain the lighthouse faithfully and die within a year from systemic failure caused by incomplete modifications. She remained in the water, waiting. After approximately 20 minutes, I placed my palm near hers again. Through the connection, I asked if there was any alternative, any way to complete the modifications without the 3-day absence. She showed me one possibility. If I could arrange official leave, even just 36 hours, her people could attempt accelerated transformation. More dangerous, higher risk of complications, but potentially completable in a shorter time frame. 36 hours was still longer than I could arrange without advance notice, but it was closer to feasible. I asked what would happen if complications occurred during accelerated transformation. She showed me honestly. Approximately 30% chance of death, 40% chance of permanent disability, 30% chance of successful completion, compared to the standard 72-hour process, which had 95% success rate. I pulled back from the connection. A choice between probable death from refusing transformation versus possible death from attempting accelerated transformation versus certain long-term death from leaving transformation incomplete. All 3 options were terrible, and all 3 resulted from my own choice to accept the original bargain. She dove beneath the surface and disappeared. I climbed back to the lighthouse, my breathing increasingly labored, and sat at my desk staring at the unresponded letter from my sister. I'd been given a choice to reconnect with family, with humanity, with the life I'd left behind when I'd become a lighthouse keeper. I'd ignored it because I couldn't explain what I'd become. Now I was being given another choice. Survival versus duty, transformation versus integrity, completing the bargain versus maintaining my principles. And I had approximately 6 weeks to decide which kind of death I preferred, fast, slow, or catastrophically premature. On April 3, 2021, I made a phone call that would end my career as a Coast Guard lighthouse keeper. I contacted the regional coordinator and requested immediate medical leave, cited severe health complications requiring urgent intervention. I provided minimal details: respiratory issues, circulatory problems, diagnosis requiring short-term intensive treatment. The coordinator was reluctant. Medical leave required documentation, physician statements, proof of medical necessity. I told him I would provide documentation after initial treatment, that the situation was urgent enough that I couldn't wait for bureaucratic processing. I was requesting leave under emergency medical protocols, accepting that my position might be terminated if the Coast Guard determined I'd violated procedures. He put me on hold for approximately 15 minutes. When he returned, he informed me that I could take 48 hours emergency leave, effective immediately, but that I would be subject to fitness for duty review upon return. He was arranging for temporary keeper staffing to arrive within 6 hours. I needed to have the facility ready for transfer when the replacement arrived. I spent those 6 hours preparing detailed operational notes, documenting everything the temporary keeper would need to know. I wrote instructions for equipment that didn't appear in official manuals, systems I'd maintained using her salvaged components. I knew the temporary keeper would likely be confused by some modifications, but I did my best to make the lighthouse operational in my absence. The replacement keeper arrived at 2:47 p.m. Coast Guard Petty Officer James Morrison, 26 years old, recently qualified for temporary keeper duties. I conducted standard facility transfer, showed him the beacon controls, maintenance schedules, emergency procedures. He asked about some of the non-standard equipment. I told him the truth. I'd installed custom components to improve reliability. He noted it in his log, but didn't object. I left Crowley Point at 4:18 p.m., the first time I'd been off the peninsula in 9 months. She was waiting in the water 300 feet offshore, visible through my thermal vision as a distinct heat signature. Morrison couldn't see her, was focused on his new responsibilities, didn't notice when I stopped to look back at the lighthouse one final time. She met me at a location 8 miles south, a sheltered cove with deep water access and minimal human traffic. I arrived at 6:34 p.m., found her waiting with 2 others. They'd prepared an underwater site, approximately 40 feet down, where the transformation would occur. The process began at 7:00 p.m. They brought me underwater. I could hold breath for approximately 90 seconds at that point, insufficient for what they needed to do. They placed me in a sealed chamber, something they'd constructed from salvaged materials, with air supply from the surface through a hand-operated pump system. The chamber was small, barely large enough for me to lie down, with transparent panels so they could monitor my condition. Through the palm connection, she showed me what would happen. They would fill the chamber with water mixed with compounds from deep-sea vents, minerals, and biological agents that would facilitate the transformation. I would breathe the mixture. It would feel like drowning initially, but my body would adapt within approximately 20 minutes. The adaptation process would be extremely unpleasant. The respiratory and circulatory modifications would occur simultaneously over the next 36 hours. My lungs would restructure to extract oxygen from water, my heart would adapt to operate under increased pressure, my blood chemistry would shift to carry oxygen more efficiently. The process was essentially controlled drowning, followed by forced adaptation. She asked one final time if I was certain. I showed her acceptance through the connection. I had 48 hours before I needed to return to the lighthouse. 36 hours for transformation, 12 hours for recovery. The timeline was tight but theoretically adequate. They sealed the chamber at 7:23 p.m. and began filling it with the modified water. The liquid was cold, darker than normal seawater, with a chemical smell I couldn't identify. When it reached my chest level, my breathing became difficult. Panic response, knowing I would soon be submerged. The water reached my face at 7:31 p.m. I took a final breath of air, then the chamber filled completely. I held that breath for as long as possible, approximately 2 minutes, then my body forced me to inhale. Water entered my lungs. The sensation was exactly like drowning. Water in my lungs, no air, panic flooding my nervous system. I thrashed in the chamber, hit my head against the panels, tried to find any air pocket. There was none. I was drowning, and I'd chosen this, and I was going to die in a sealed box 40 feet underwater. But then the adaptation began. My lungs stopped trying to expel the water, started instead extracting oxygen directly from it. The panic decreased gradually, replaced by different sensation, not comfortable, not normal, but functional. I was breathing water, and it was sustaining me. The next 36 hours occurred in fragmented awareness. I experienced the modifications as waves of pain, system reorganizations that felt like every cell in my body was being simultaneously destroyed and rebuilt. My heart rhythm changed, beating differently, pumping blood through restructured circulation pathways. My lungs burned continuously, adapting to extract oxygen from water instead of air. Periodically, she appeared outside the chamber, checking my condition through the transparent panels. I could see her thermal signature, could feel her concern through brief palm connections when she touched the chamber surface. She was monitoring closely, ready to abort if the transformation went catastrophically wrong. At approximately 32 hours into the process, I experienced complete circulatory collapse. My heart stopped functioning, blood pressure dropped to zero, consciousness began fading. Through blurring thermal vision, I saw her and the others opening the chamber urgently, pulling me out, performing some kind of intervention I couldn't track. When awareness returned, I was breathing again, breathing water, heart functioning, but barely. The transformation had nearly killed me. She showed me through connection that we were at the critical threshold. I could continue for the final 4 hours and potentially complete successfully. Or we could stop now, and I would likely survive, but remain incompletely transformed. I showed her to continue. I'd come this far, risked this much. Stopping now meant the same incomplete state I'd been trying to avoid. She returned me to the chamber and sealed it again. The final 4 hours were less painful but more disorienting. I felt my body stabilizing into new configurations, systems settling into modified function. My breathing through water became easier, almost natural. My heart rhythm stabilized at a slower rate than human normal but stronger, more efficient.